What puzzles me is, if that were the case, how come that every once in a while we see the state crack down on the private sector? So most recently, as we probably all have noticed, since 2021, we see a lot of crackdown on the tech sector, on the finance sector, on the private tutoring, etc. This kind of headlines were everywhere, in China and beyond China. We see famous entrepreneurs got arrested, for non-transparent reasons, so we wonder what is going on. So the most recent wave really induced a wave of anxiety, and people wonder, is the CCP now changing its attitude towards the private sector? And some China watchers will believe that this whole wave of crackdown reflects a heightened risk of business under political centralization of Xi Jinping. Maybe this is personal, maybe this is temporary, it's a mark of the time. But if that's true, it's also puzzling to see throughout this entire crackdown, we saw the party state try to reassure the private sector every once in a while. So we saw China's premier back in 2023 came out and say, there is no concern about the private sector. They will very much be part of China's socialism market economy. We see that they comment on their own actions that China is just reshaping, not choking private business. Xi Jinping himself, almost every single year, will come out to talk to private sector representatives and reassure again that we're going to, have a large private sector in China. And this very year, 2025, we saw the first law issued in China about the private enterprise, and that promotes fair competition, equal treatment. So it looks like the party state has no intention really to choke and crack down on the private sector. So what I realized in doing more research, going back into China's economic reform history, is that if we think this is just a one-time issue, this is just a back and forth, under Xi Jinping, we're missing the big picture. Actually, if we start to look at modern China's economic history since 1978, when China's economic reform began, we would notice that the state crackdown on private sector happens regularly. Every once in a while, we'll see a similar wave coming out. Now, 1993 actually would be this watershed. Before 1993, the state's crackdown on the private sector was a little bit different from what we see today. Before 1993, when the state wanted to crack down on the private sector, it would be indiscriminate crackdown on the entire private economy. So the first time it happened was in 1982. So China opened up, China allowed private entrepreneurs to thrive in this country, right, in 1978. And they quickly became large and they were becoming richer. And so Deng Xiaoping, the very person that started China's economic reform, got concerned. He was like, wait a minute, these are rich people, these are very well-organized people. What if they turn against the regime? After all, we all know about, modernization theory that says middle-class bourgeoisie, they are a very dangerous force of regime change. So in 1982, Deng Xiaoping ordered all of the provincial leaders in China and say, every province, you have to get a few cases prosecuting the most successful private entrepreneurs, for distorting a socialist market economy. And then this wave went on, a lot of famous entrepreneurs got arrested, and then you see economies started to slow down. And Deng Xiaoping regretted it. So 1984, he's like, enough is enough, let's stop all of these prosecutions. So that was the first time. And then private economy picked up again. And then 1989, Tiananmen happened. Once Tiananmen happened, Deng Xiaoping and the party leadership was like, who is funding the students? Where did they get all of this support? It's the private entrepreneurs. So Deng said, all right, the market reform clearly have went again too far. These people are too powerful, too rich. We're going to have a second round of crackdown on the private entrepreneurs in China. Indiscriminate, all of the largest ones. So out of a fear of political retribution, a lot of private entrepreneurs, many of them are famous people that we know today, they decided back then to donate their companies to the state. And this is actually the beginning of how we see, TVE, county level, village level enterprises that seems to be state-owned. A lot of them were actually donated by private entrepreneurs. So this wave went on 1992. Deng realized that, wait a minute, we still cannot really kill the private economy, but the cost is too high. And then he decided, we're going to reverse again. And this was his famous southern tour. He went to the south, he reassured China, he says, in fact, we still need private economy. So 1993, China wrote, incorporated socialist market economy into China's constitution. After that, the state did not stop in cracking down the private sector. It's just that from 1993 on, we start to see a sectoral pattern. They go sector after sector. And based on my collection of government documents and news, all of these sectors at one point were encroached by the state. So I use the word encroach to separate that from regular regulation, right? By encroachment, I'm talking about forced shareholder sales, forced merger and acquisition with state-owned enterprises, the SOEs, forced sales to local governments, arrest of private entrepreneurs, or shutdown of the entire private company or entire private sector. So we start to see a sectoral pattern. So this is what intrigues me. My research question then is, when and where does the CCP encroach into the private sector? And why is that the case? Why do they need to do this? A little bit preview of my findings for you. Well, I realized that one of the important reasons that why they will go after private sector is when they politicize companies in China. This creates instability in state-business relations. By politicization, I'm borrowing this concept from Boyko, Schleifer, and Vishny. Politicization is to have business pressured or bribed to bring their objectives in line with those of the politicians. And this is a pattern in China's political economy. When politicization happens in a business, in a sector, it's very likely that we will see state encroachment and private retreat. So what does politicization mean exactly? What is the content of it? So basically what I find is that the CCP, they often ask firms to provide political services. Some of these services we're very familiar with, right? Office buying, which is companies pay for officials to bribe the official superior to get promoted in the political echelon. There is having company to create employment, particularly in economic slowdown. We're seeing that right now. This is actually one of the political services that is increasing at this moment. We see that the state asks companies to monitor and surveil the society, right? These are all commonly known political services. However, there are two more that is less noticed, and I write about them in this book. One of them is called visibility projects. We'll talk about this in detail, that benefits individual official in Chinese political system. And the other is to have companies to do societal control for the state, both appeasement and suppression strategies. So the company will send money and the company sends human resource on the ground to help the state to manage societal order. And whenever a sector is politicized, when a company is asked to provide political services, this is when we start to notice state-business relations start to change. Now, it's not always bad news for the company. If the political service is like a bribe in nature, meaning only one company or few companies can do it, the state does reciprocate. However, if the political service is imposed onto all companies in the sector or all companies in the locality, that's like a regulation. That is increasing cost without necessarily giving these business returns. When that happens is when we see state encroachment more likely to happen. So before I explain this with more fun details, give you a little bit of roadmap of today's presentation, I'll very briefly go through how I reached these conclusions, and I'm going to introduce you what these services are, and then we'll talk about concluding thoughts. Now, throughout the talk, if you have a question or comment, anytime, please raise your hand and we can discuss. So, first thing is to operationalize my research question, right? I wonder why, when, and where does the state encroach into the sector, and why? Now, I have to operationalize it. So the outcome that I'm interested in is deprivatization. This will mean state-initiated process to have government or state-owned enterprises to procure all private firms in the sector. So in Chinese language, this will mean 国有化,收归国有,取消民营,民营退出. All of these are counted as deprivatization. This will be the most extreme form of state encroachment. So it helps me tease out other mechanisms that might explain it. I studied two sectors, and these are the foot soldier of urban life. One of them is urban buses on the street, and the other is solid waste treatment. So these sectors are very similar in their relationship with the government. However, we see a very different outcome for them. So for example, here you see urban bus, the red line. At the peak of privatization, that is around 2006, you will see over 80% of Chinese cities have bus services provided by the private sector. Today, it's down to below 20%, right? But in the solid waste sector, we see an opposite trend. throughout the years, despite these sectors have so many similarities, the waste sector, you see private companies steadily grow up. So we're going to leverage all of these variations across sector, within sector, across locality, and over time to understand why they have such different outcomes for private companies. And the preview is because they're providing different political services for the state, so we'll come to that. The research is done between 2015 to 2019, and I went to 15 Chinese cities. I visited them many of them are multiple times. 2 waves of hundreds of interviews with over 200 government officials and business people. And then I collected my own data from primary sources to do my quantitative analysis. So let's begin with the first political service that I described that companies provide to the state. This is visibility projects. So before I explain it to you, let me show you some examples. Here you are looking at the wastewater treatment plant. So this plant here, you will see all of these are sediment tanks. Now the interesting thing of this wastewater treatment plant is this will be the 3rd one in the city. And honestly, the wastewater amount in the city is not actually that much. So on a regular day, only 20% of all of these tanks will be filled. Now when leaders come to visit, they will fill the rest with tap water. So it absolutely was built at overcapacity, 5 times more of the needed capacity. A private company built this. Here's another example. This is a solid waste incineration plant, right, and a recycling center. Now, if you look at this building, this was built by a designer studio. This is a very expensive architecture, huge, very impressive when you go there in person. However, when you go in there and see what they were doing, you will realize that this very fancy building does not have solid waste separation facilities. In other words, even though it's supposed to be a recycling center, paper, glass, plastic, metal, all of them will be grouped together and get burnt in the incinerator. And not burnt at the ideal temperature, which will be 800 Celsius degree. It's going to be lower, meaning this plant is going to create plenty of exhaust and dioxin into the air. Right? So this is a very interesting plant. Now here's another example. This is in Qingdao. So this is the Jiaozhou Bay Bridge. It was completed in 2006. When it was constructed, this will be the world's longest bay bridge. The interesting story about this bridge is, the issue is, the mayor back then decided Qingdao City is a city that hugs a bay. So there are many districts on all of the different areas of the bays. And for the longest time, there was no way to connect the 2 points at the bay inlet, right? So the new mayor came in and said, we got to reduce transportation time for the residents on the 2 points of the bay inlet. Let's build something to connect them. Now, absolutely valid urban planning idea. The question is, what do you build? How do you go about it? There are 2 solutions to it. You can build a bridge across over the bay inlet, or you could build an undersea tunnel, right? They are the same kind of idea. Now, all of the experts back then were saying that we need an undersea tunnel. We shouldn't build a bridge. Why is that the case? Because Qingdao in Shandong province, right, northern city, in the winter, tons of wind, snow, ice. So for a good 4 to 2 months a year, if you have a bridge on the bay inlet, no one will use it. It's too dangerous. The second thing is, even though the idea of a bridge on the bay inlet is absolutely solid, right? But you cannot actually build a bridge right there at the inlet. You got to move the bridge into the bay so that it does not obstruct ships coming in here. This is an important port city, right? So you got to be inside. That will mean the bridge is much longer. It will be expensive. It's even more hazardous in the winter. It's going to cost a lot of money. So experts say, let's avoid all of these issues. Let's build a tunnel under the sea. Now you solve all of these issues. The tunnel could be right at the bay inlet. It's not going to obstruct ship. It's going to be shorter and cheaper. And because it's under sea, it doesn't suffer from all of these weather hazards. The mayor said, no, I want a bridge because nobody could see a tunnel. So he built this bridge. The bridge eventually cost $2 billion US dollars, 30 kilometers long. But then he also realized very soon that, in fact, we also need a tunnel because everybody was correct. So they also built a tunnel under the sea, which only used 700 million US dollars. Now, what do these projects tell us? What is visibility projects? These are projects that prioritize appearance and scale over practicality, cost effectiveness, and sustainability. Officials build up with one reason. They want to promote themselves in the political system. They want to become politically visible to the upper level officials enhance their reputation and say, look, I'm such a competent, right, leader in China. The opposite of visibility projects would be all of those invisible things. So for example, stormwater sewer pipes, right? The recycling facilities, separation facilities inside a waste incineration plant. Those will be invisible. But Chinese officials, they are very prone to, they are attracted to visibility projects, not the invisible ones. So let's take a step back. Why do they want to build visibility projects? Now this comes down to Chinese party states' very distinct feature in how they incentivize their officials. Every Chinese official in this system, if they are even slightly ambitious, if they want to be promoted, then they need to do well in CCP's evaluation system. Now, there are two criteria of this evaluation system. One is loyalty, which is simply the party committee says, this guy's good. This guy has, stepped the party line, didn't overdo things, didn't do anything of his own agenda. Loyalty. The second one is competence. So CCP does care about how competent their local officials will be. But how do you measure competence in a top-down authoritarian system, right? The voters is not going to tell the central government anything. So the central government designed a top-down system, totally quantitative. It's called cadre evaluation system. It looks like this. So basically, every single official in China needs to be evaluated at the end of the year based on a table. This table goes on. There will be about over 100 policy targets. For example, what's your GDP growth last year? What is your per capita income last year? What's your unemployment rate last year? How about one-child policy? All of these policy targets then, the government, the party center in Beijing will say, here's a target for you. We want your unemployment rate to drop below 3%. You have a year, go do that, and then fill out this form. Tell us how well you do. Now, once they collect all of these numbers, they not only say, one, did you reach the targets that we assign you? But they also say, did you outcompete everybody else in your province? For example, if you're a city leader, you got to outcompete other city leaders. That's the person we want to promote. So this is a very effective system in aligning incentives of Chinese local officials. So this is how they're evaluated, right? But here's a problem. Both of these evaluation systems suffer from quite serious flaws. So in terms of the competence evaluation, where everybody is given a quantitative system, right? Every time, by the way, when we want to evaluate someone or some organization quantitatively, and we tie their result to their personal outcome, their promotion, their demotion, their bonus, their salary, people are gonna get nervous. People are gonna get afraid. So what they're gonna do is they're going to game the quantitative system to make sure they reach target with all means. So we know the system is fraught with a lot of issues. So CCP themselves announced that, okay, these provinces at this year were faking their GDP growth data, we're gonna punish these people, right? And sometimes local government officials game in the smarter way. So there was a famous case published by a scholar in Singapore that said a county was given a task of having 1 million sheep delivered at the end of the year. This county was famous for sheep, but they started with about 150,000. These are sheep, they don't multiply that way. How do you get your 1 million sheep at the end of the year? Guess what the local officials do to game that target? They go around and they borrowed and rent sheep from other places. And on the day of evaluation, they ship all of these sheep into the county to satisfy the target. So this system suffers from gaming behavior. Now, the second part of evaluation, loyalty. We all understand, right? Say, our boss, right? Our workplace. The boss says, you gotta be loyal. We're gonna wonder, what does that mean? What is loyalty? What should I do to show that I'm loyal? What should I not do to show that I'm loyal? Eventually, loyalty comes down to very subjective evaluation. It basically boils down to, do they like me, right? Does the boss think I'm a good employee, right? So loyalty is actually very confusing sometimes. It's difficult to grasp. And the outcome then, being evaluated by these two standards, is we see the Chinese government officials suffer from high level of anxiety because they're really uncertain about, are we doing enough in the quantitative evaluation? Can we really outcompete others without gaming the system? If everybody's gaming the system, what does the system even mean, right? It's not effective in choosing the most competent. So here's a quote. One of the government officials says, The evaluation system is serious, but there is a lot of art in making your numbers pretty. It is art. And then the national government official said, why do you think Buddhism and fortune telling are so popular among Chinese officials? Which is totally true, by the way. Fortune telling is a really growing and luxurious industry to get into in China. A good fortune teller will have a large clientele both in the government and in business because these people are very nervous. So it creates all of these sentiment. And the outcome then, what will local officials do, particularly the ambitious ones? They're going into hyper competition. So one thing that is already recorded in the literature of what they do is they try to engage in patron-client relationship with their boss in the government. So we have evidence and records, academic writings, about how officials try to bribe their superior to get promoted. That's one thing they do out of this anxiety. But they also want to show competence beyond just the formal system, to stand out beyond the system to say, I am really competent. Forget about the numbers. Everybody has pretty numbers. How do you do that? And how do you do that in a politically safe way? Here's the issue. In authoritarian states, you don't want to look that competent because we know all of the authoritarian politics suffer from this phenomenon, dictator's dilemma, meaning a dictator can only choose either the most loyal or the most competent. They cannot have it all because in the end, these two qualities, competence and loyalty, come at odds with each other, especially at the highest level, right? Think about what loyalty is. Loyalty means you gotta be one, blind. You gotta first be blind so you obey and you do not object. And two, that would mean you can't see problems and you would never challenge your boss, right? But competence is the opposite. Competence means you will be able to see. You know there's a better way to do things, and you know exactly how to execute it. This is why the two qualities come at odds. In authoritarian states, what would dictators choose? Of course, the most loyal, because that's your regime stability. So all of the local officials in China understand, we want to show that we're competent, but we don't want to be too competent. And what is too competent? That might mean doing things that the party state does not like. So for example, in 1996, there was this famous county leader decided to go for universal health care. So without any party directive, this county leader decided that I'm going to use our budget. We have enough money. We're not that rich, but we have enough money. We want to provide universal health care to my county citizens. Highly popular. Hey, but the party state never said one could have universal health care in China. They thought about this, they sat on this, they discussed it, and eventually the party center said, this is too risky. If a county does this, eventually what if the entire country's populace required universal health care? So this person got demoted. Was he competent? Yes. Did he do the wrong thing? Yes. He did something that the party did not ask him to do. So what happened is, these ambitious people that want to show their competence decided that they gotta be safe about it. So how to be safe? You invent visibility projects. So here are the features of visibility projects. Why would they be both showing competence and loyalty? First one, visibility projects is absolutely extra effort. This is not what is required of you in the official quantitative evaluation system. It's something you do extra. What is that extra? You look at what the party state wants and encourages at this point of time. So all of these are central policy directives. So for example, right now, the CCP is very interested in AI, robotics, right? All of these technology innovation. Move your visibility projects into tech sector. Now, for the longest time, CCP has been very interested in environmental protection. Now, do visibility projects then in environmental systems. So you engage with party directives, particularly those that are ambiguous, meaning the new directives, where the CCP doesn't yet know what is the right thing to do, how to do it. Now, this gives you space to be creative, and you would not risk looking disloyal because you're working on their directive, but you have space. You can be creative, you can overdo things, you will show competence. So this is why it satisfies both competence and loyalty requirement. And then another feature of visibility projects is, because the goal is promotion, right? So it is going to prioritize top-down demands over bottom-up demands. Now, we are not saying that in China, what the party states wants is never consistent with what the public wants. Sometimes they are consistent, lucky everyone, right? That's the ideal outcome. But sometimes top-down demands is not consistent with bottom-up demands, and there are several reasons for this. One of them is simply that the party states is top down, right? They have their goals. They are willing to ignore public demand. And the second thing is, this is a huge country. There's a huge information issue. Sometimes Beijing simply doesn't know what is the best for each locality in the country. It has to have a very simple directive for the entire country. So for these reasons, top-down demands in China and bottom-up ones do not always align. If we notice a project that is prioritizing Beijing but not locality when they're inconsistent, this is more likely to be a visibility project. The last feature, this is ex post. So usually visibility projects will be very quickly launched and they tend to be short-lived. Two reasons. One, government officials' promotion window is limited, particularly in an authoritarian state when everybody's reposted constantly. So my data shows that city leaders, for example, are usually reposted every 3 years because CCP cannot allow local lords from forming. You gotta move people around. Don't let them have local network, right? So these people have very short promotion windows. You gotta get a project done before your third year comes in. And then once you leave, think about it. What kind of successor will have incentive to maintain your predecessor's project? You don't get credit for doing it. So they're less likely to be maintained, so they're short-lived. So let me give you more examples. This is a solar farm. It is in the shape of a panda. So the panda part, this is the largest panda-shaped solar farm in China. If you ever get to be on a helicopter, you will see that it's a panda. So it is impressive, right? The visibility part is clear. And for a company, this is fine. It's just, a little bit extra expense. It's not too much. This is a culture center. Now, this place is famous for crab. And they decided that we want to have a center to, tell everybody we're good with having crabs. So this is the largest crab building in the world in the vivid shape and color of it. I just love this because the fine hairs on the crab's leg, it's amazing. After a few years, the leader turned out to not like it. The leader's like, what is this? What is this aesthetics? And so the local government officials tore it out after 3 years. It took a lot of money, by the way. Now, these are just entertaining, right? It could be entertaining. Sometimes, though, visibility projects start to show its problem. It might come against what development really requires. So what I'm showing you here is forestation project in China. So China has this, deforestation and desertification issue, particularly northwest China. At some point, Beijing realized that we got to stop the desert from encroaching into northeast from northwest. We got to plant trees and bushes. Now, in the desert area, then, local officials say this is a great opportunity. What should we plant, though, to have a reforestation project? The ideal expert, suggestion is you mix plants up. You have some trees, but you also need to have a lot of native bushes, right? In the desert, they're all low growth. Those are stable. They're wrapped to the sand. They're going to keep water. But the local official in this place, and actually more than one place, decided that we don't want bushes. What are bushes? They're like brown, they're low, they're crawling, they really don't look attractive. We want trees. And what kind of trees? We're going to have, they think, poplar trees. Now, poplar is this special tree. It's one of the fastest growing trees in the world. You give it 2 years, it's going to reach adult size. 2 years you plant poplar trees, you have a huge forest that's visible to everybody. But the issue with planting poplar trees and only poplar trees is one, these trees are actually pretty water hungry before they became adult trees. And you get to continue irrigation afterwards when they became a forest. And two, these trees are really susceptible to pest or disease when you do monoculture. So you shouldn't plant just the trees. You need to mix them up with other plants. But the local officials decided that we want scale. We want an impact. We want to look incredible. So they have poplar trees. This leader, after had poplar trees planted, he got promoted for environmental initiative. We learned about all of these later because this person and all of the previous leaders I talk about fell in corruption cases. So all of their previous faults were all mentioned. So now we know this person was promoted, and then the successor has zero incentive to maintain this forest. So this is what the poplar forests look like 5 years later. So this is when visibility projects actually come at the cost of development, and it happens. Visibility projects have trends. So as we mentioned that today, right, CCP cares about innovation and tech. Now, robotic industry is one of those important industries to show innovation. But not all localities in China are suitable for robotics. You need logistics, you need talent in particular. So robotic centers in China tend to be on the East Coast. Universities, shipping, all of it. What do you do if you are a province in the middle of China? So this is Guizhou province. You also want to show your competence in having robotics. So what do? You have a robot park. So by the way, this is the largest transformation, statue in the world. If you look at how big this is, that's a door. Like people will go in from here. So you can see how huge this is in the scale. The concept of this robot park is, this will become a symbol that this place takes robotics industry seriously. And this place has data center. And eventually you will have a robotic industry being attracted to all of this kind of policies. Show Beijing, we're working on it. So this is another kind of visibility project that you will see. Now, remember the book is about state-business relations. So what do firms have to do with all of these? It turns out, because visibility projects emphasize scale, scope, they are spending a lot of money. These are wasteful spending on what the project looks like on the scale. Government officials do not want to be blamed by Beijing and say, you're wasting public finance on this kind of projects. So they will go to companies and they say, why don't you pay for it? At least carry part of the cost. So companies think about this situation and they find this very difficult. On the one hand, they know they need to have a good relationship with the government. But on the other hand, if you think about visibility projects, they focus on look. The cost go to the look. You can't necessarily cool that cost, right? You might not get the benefits. So business finds this a very difficult demand. So you start state business negotiation, right? If the visibility project can only be built by one company, usually happy ending for both the state and the business. The government will reward the private business with some other contract, cheap land, you name it. But if a visibility project requires an entire sector to come together to deliver an outcome, no company can stand out in this deal and say, we're the hero. Quite the opposite. If you're the only company that refused to donate, contribute to all of these kind of campaigns, you will come out as the one guilty person that you sabotaged a great project. So it really depends on what the nature is that you will see state-business relations start to change. Now, let me show you a case of the negative outcome, which is when visibility projects become sector-wide and become more like regulation. So this is the bus sector. Bus has never been really drawing much attention, right? But how did it suddenly become a popular sector for visibility projects? Because Beijing started to mention we need clean air. What does clean air mean? Part of it is less private vehicles, more buses. And so city government officials said, great, let's do visibility projects in this sector. And there are three very popular visibility projects in the sector. One, I call them beautification. So this is when the local government official will say, we're going to compete for titles that is, national civilized city, national public transportation city. Part of this title competition is to make all of your buses look clean, uniform, they look exactly the same. You have an impressive bus fleet. So this is a relatively cheap project for bus companies to do. Second type is the government will say, we know the contract states that bus companies only need to replace their bus fleet every 8 to 10 years. But now we want visibility projects. So even though your current bus fleet is only 2 to 3 years old, we want you, bus companies, to replace them with new type of buses, several types of them. New energy buses, high capacity buses, and aesthetically pleasing buses, like troller buses. Here are what they look like. That is a new energy bus, LPG fuel. When it was first, introduced in Chinese cities, the engines were actually not compatible with LPG. And also the city government did not invest in all of the facilities like LPG charging station, none of that. Before all of that were in place, they require bus companies to invest in LPG. Now this visibility project eventually morphed into more of a developmental project after 10 years. But for 10 years, it was creating a lot of issues in terms of environment quality and operation of buses because the fuel was too new for every other facility. This is a fun one. This is called a straddling bus. So straddling bus responds to high capacity, right? More people ride buses than private cars. So let's have a huge bus. How big is this thing? It can accommodate up to 1,000 passengers on the top level. And then down here, it's hollow. So the concept is regular traffic, small cars can drive under the straddling bus. A few hiccups here. One, the straddling bus cannot make a turn. It is so huge that it needs a 120-meter wide street to make a full turn, so they're only on a straight line. Second, it turns out, once the little cars get under its belly, it's really difficult for them to get out again. So they just got stuck. And not mentioning like how tall it is. So in a lot of cities, when you have bridges in place, straddling bus just doesn't go to these places. So after a few years, again, tons of investment in this project, after a few months, they decided, well, this is not working. We're gonna let go of the straddling bus. But bus companies are required to invest in this kind of projects, right? Third type of visibility projects, bus rapid transit system, so BRT. Now this concept comes from Latin America. This is enclosed dedicated bus lanes with priority to buses at intersections. This is a very good concept. The issue is, BRT is highly visible, absolutely shows urban planning effort, right? But to build a BRT, you gotta have careful planning because this is interrupting with your current traffic pattern. In Latin American cities, when they had BRT, on average, it took 3 years to construct alone. Guess what's that speed in China? When we talk about Chinese infrastructure speed, 8 months. Chinese cities will finish building a BRT in 8 months. And so the problem is, in 14 out of 23 cities that had BRT, 14 reported worse traffic congestion because the planning was inadequate. This is the speed issue. You have to get a project done before your promotion window. And 5 cities eventually decided that this is causing more problems. Safety problems, traffic congestion problems, totally against the regional goal. So they demolished BRT. Now, bus companies, their cost in BRT is they have to replace their bus with high-capacity buses. These are longer buses. And then they have to let go of some of their most profitable bus routes that the government gave them rights to use. So with all of these visibility projects showing up across Chinese cities in the urban bus sector, because the center said clean air, less private vehicle, we start to see private bus companies start to leave the sector, exit. And the exit is usually violent and involuntary. So I'm not going to bother you with very boring stats, but I'll just show you how quickly do these projects correspond to the exit of private sector. On the top, what you're seeing, the top line, blue line, is let's call it the natural death of a private sector in bus, right? Buses are no longer popular. You have subway, you have every other things, right? So natural death will mean private sector gradually drop after 15 to 20 years. But if you have visibility projects, the 3 types of projects I mentioned in the bus sector, based on how frequently the government launches them, you will see private sector dies very soon. So if you have, for example, a very ambitious city government official that says 3 years I want 5 projects in the bus sector, then you will see the private bus companies exit after 6 years. That's how quickly it will finish up private sector. But how does it happen, this process? So I use cases, and these are, I hope, fun to read cases for those of you who have the book, to show you how this process happens. So basically, if I summarize, first stage, government says, let's do projects. All of you, because it's sector-wide, all the bus firms have to contribute. All the bus firms understand they really depend on a good relationship with government. They will say, fine, we're going to agree. And then costs start to rise with more visibility projects proposed in the sector. All of the firms, we're talking about state-owned enterprise and private companies together, they will resist. Some of this resistance will include private companies suing the city government. For example, in the court, that's a big no-no in many places. And then government says, you want to go against visibility projects that we ask you guys to do? We're going to use coercion. See here, because all bus companies have to contribute, you don't use carrots. You can't open that gap. You can't give them really money and benefits. You use coercion. The most common way to coerce companies in China, even beyond bus, will include tax violation. So tax law in China is probably one of the most comprehensive, complicated law system, tax law in the world. Some scholars say it's intentionally so. So you can catch any business for any tax law violation. So tax is a very common way to coerce companies. Traffic law violation is another one. Environmental, you name it, tons of ways. So government coerced them. And then all companies are like, okay, fine, they're serious, let's continue. But then more projects show up, and then private companies really cannot take it because they don't have unlimited budget. They have a soft budget, hard budget constraint. So they will resist. Government officials then come in and say, private companies are resisting, state-owned enterprises are okay, we're going to deprivatize this sector. So a lot of the times, deprivatization in this sector is happening through coercion and violence. And I have a fun story in the book to tell you exactly how this happens. How do you deprivatize a whole sector? So this is the part of the bus sector. And here we're showing that when political services are closer to bribes, you will see state-business relations change, right? Like a regulation, then state-business change for the worse. But sometimes state-business relations, when the political services demanded of companies, are more like a bribe. And this is the case in solid waste sector. Here we're talking about societal control. I'll be very quick throughout this section, mindful of time, but this is more intuitive anyways. In a lot of sectors in China, so I study waste incineration, but think about PX chemical companies, think about paper manufacturing, think about all of the manufacturing that could produce, toxic in the air, in the water, damaging environment. In this kind of sectors, the public tends to protest, right? We call these NIMBY movements, a lot of NIMBY protests. Waste incineration is one of them. What I discovered is basically that when it comes to this kind of protest, Chinese government understanding that their legitimacy, right, is based on delivering performance, they really want to distance themselves from creating problem for the people. They don't want to be blamed. So the government will go to the companies and say, the public is not happy about these projects, but we really do need these projects. Government is behind these projects. We need to burn our garbage. We need to have chemical. We need to have paper. We need to manufacture. What do? The government then have different relationships depending on the company's ownership. When the government decide to use appeasement, so we're talking about find the scapegoat, tell the public, all of this is evil company's fault, right? The company will come out, take a heavy fine. The company is going to give you guys money. The company is going to invite some of you to work at the company, and we will shut down this company. We'll suspend its operation until it upgrades its operation. We promise you, the government says, we will deal with this polluting company seriously. So this is called the scapegoating. When it comes to scapegoat, the Chinese government likes to work with private companies. Private companies, they don't have rich political capital, which I talk in details in this book. Private companies' political capital is based on individual connections with officials. These are vulnerable, and these change. So private companies are willing. They're like, fine, you can fine us, you can punish us, but under the table, once we are become your scapegoat, give us some lax room, right? Don't really pay attention to our cost-cutting measures. So the government and the private companies tend to make a deal, like, okay, you will act as scapegoat in front of the public. We'll send you on a silver platter to the public, but we're going to cut you some deal in the back. But sometimes these protests are so big. In some kind of cases, for example, chemical factories, you can't just buy off the public. The public really just doesn't want this kind of factory to be their neighborhood. They will escalate. They will not take money. So the government and them will have to use suppression, meaning sending violent forces onto the street. Now, when the government needs to use violent suppression, they suddenly realize they can't do that with private companies, right? You can't look like you're using violent force to protect private interest. And also, when you use violence, you got to be approved by Beijing. Beijing does not like seeing violent suppression. So you got to partner up with a state actor. This is where state-owned enterprises come in. Government will say, we would much rather use suppression when our partner is state-owned enterprise, because then this makes the project legit, it's politically safe. Then we will have extra political capital from these state-owned enterprises. Together, we use suppression for public good. So what happened in this sector, I discovered, is that based on the government's prediction and calculation and history of how bad protests could become, they choose different partners. When they decide to get money and buy off work, they work with private companies. So private companies in this sector grow. But if they decide that the protest cannot be used with appeasement strategies, you have to suppress, you work with state-owned enterprises. So this is a very interesting implicit contract between what companies bring to the government. So here's a quote that a government official said, here is the thing. Usually, local governments have no trouble controlling social unrest, but when they do have trouble, it is best to have a central SOE by their side. So this is why in a lot of controversial sectors now, we see more and more state capital entering. Part of it is because these SOEs could bring political capital in the sector, justify suppression. And another very interesting dynamic that I observed in China is the dynamic between SOEs, particularly large ones, and local government officials. A lot of the times, central SOEs and large SOEs actually have a dominant position when they're dealing with local government officials. They think they are bringing local government favor. They don't depend on these small city level governments. So they have absolutely stronger bargaining power. And this is another reason for why they would not be scapegoat. So I had this fun conversation. It's actually an observation that I included in my book. I was at this meal arranged by a central SOE in a Chinese city. And the SOE was making this deal with the city government over a 10 billion yuan project. It's huge. They've been cultivating this deal for many years. And at this meal, I got to observe the SOE tell the local government. And they said, look, we have been cultivating this deal for so long, right? We paid your big guy. Your big guy is happy. And our big guy really wants the deal to happen. A deal this big, you never know. You see car accidents happen all the time, right? Now, this is not to say, by the way, I'm not saying they're going for some unthinkable assassination plan. But what I'm saying is the fact that they don't mind using this kind of language, you would never see that from private enterprises in China. No private entrepreneurs will threaten Chinese officials in this way. But central SOEs, they could. So this is a very interesting dynamic. And this is why local governments choose private companies and student enterprises differently, depending on what their political need is. In conclusion, I hope in this book I have presented that politicization of firms is an integral part of China's political economy model from the very beginning. This is actually not new. It's just that at this point we're observing more of it, partly because we're observing China's economy going down. So when you see Chinese economy slow down, that would mean the state has extra need for companies to provide capital, expertise, speed to get projects done. They need more political services. And on the company side, it's just very difficult sometimes for them to say no. So at this point, they will resist because the economy is slowing down. Their profit margin is thinner, their credit is tighter. So companies are having more trouble with providing political services. And this is why we're seeing a lot of the state-business conflict emerge above the water. And we're like, is things changing? But actually, it's not. It has been this case in China's political model. It could happen in all sectors. So the fact that I write about all of these mundane sectors, right, bus, waste incineration, and you still see the government try to have business do stuff for government, that just shows how widespread and systemic politicization of business is. And we're not talking about, the sectors that we all, pay attention to. They have to do with national security. We're talking about the state quietly transforming business operation on the ground based on all of these small to medium to large political needs. So this is very much part of China's political system. Political cost of doing business, therefore, I think is a field that needs more attention. We need to think about how companies in China could, or maybe they could not, correctly predict the risk and associated cost with them. One thing interesting I discovered, for example, in terms of visibility projects, right? Do firms want to do it? Maybe some firms will prefer visibility projects so they build good relation with the state. But it turns out actually firms find this kind of political services to not benefiting them, and for very simple reasons. Think about a visibility project. That is very different than in the West when a company say, I'm going to donate to a politician's campaign. When it comes to visibility projects, business has no control over the timing of it. They happen based on political cycle. They don't happen based on what the business needs at a certain time. And the business has no control over the cost of it because the cost has to be large enough for a political official to be noticed. It's not in the business control at all. And sometimes business don't even have control over who are these political services benefiting. It comes from the government. It could be any leader in the city. And the business might not need to build a relationship with these leaders. So business in general find providing political services to be a less than ideal way to build relationship with the state. They would much rather classic way to build state-business relations, right? So lobbying, join the party, join the People's Congress, right? Even corruption, all of those, business have control. Political services, business have very little control. So they're less willing to do this. And after all, so another observation of all of this is, Chinese government indeed, as the literature said, has been trying to curb economic predation. They are trying to cut off the opportunities of corruption. They are trying to do their best to have an even playing field between private companies and state-owned enterprises. But the Chinese government has never really seriously curbed political predation of firms. And this comes from deep anxiety about what rich people and business could do in an authoritarian state. So they always leave that door open. Now, if you leave that door open, so by that I mean, for example, this latest law in 2025, right? Government will say, we're going to guarantee all of these equal competition between private companies and SOEs. They go on and on and on. But the very second clause in this law, they say, but we also must make sure private companies go in the right political direction. So they always leave that door open to make sure they have control over private economy. What that means is politicization will continue in this country. This is a different matter from states' economic predation on business. Another implication is that ownership of firms in China does matter. There are systematic differences between state-owned enterprises and private companies. So here, sector again matters. In some sectors, when you don't have SOE, but only private companies, then the dynamic between state-business relations is again a little bit different. So all of these actually requires further research. So the concern in China's political economy with politicization as part of it is that can China continue to attract and retain private investment? Right? We think about China's fast speed of growth, this miraculous growth, but then really, how long did that last? Less than 40 years. That is in fact a very short period of time. So can China continue doing what it did? Part of it comes back to how do you deal with your business? Can you set up rule of law? Can you tie the government's hand, both economically and politically? At the end of this talk, I'm going to use the first quote that show up in this book as the ending. This is a quote coming from a government official, and then he was telling about this teaching from a party study session. He said the party's teaching was clear. Economy is secondary to politics in this country. We will give up economic growth without hesitation for political needs. So this is a darker place to stop, but I'll end my talk here. Thank you very much again, and I look forward to questions and comments.
In terms of the notion of causality here, are these officials actually thinking, I want to eventually take over these firms and I'm setting them up to fail such that I can take over them?
The government does not usually go in and say, we want to kill off the private sector. That was a lot of the times not a goal. And the reason I say that is because you see how they work the company when they demand things. They usually, if they have carrots, they start with carrots and then they move on to stick. At the end, when they're really feeling the time pressure, they use deprivatization, which is very costly. So for example, in the bus sector, now that so many cities have, again, a public provided bus sector, governments are realizing we can't make our ends meet. We have to re-privatize it. And now people have learned, they're like, we're not coming back to the bus sector, right? So a lot of the times it's not their original goal. Now, even though I say that, I have to say this is sector by sector. In some sectors, I would not be surprised if the government's goal was to, in the end, control the entire production. Rare earth comes to mind. So rare earth is one of those sectors that Chinese government nationalized, also deprivatized at around about 10 to 13 years ago, foreseeing that this is going to be a future ground, strategic assets. So in that case, they are very clear they wanted to deprivatize, right? So this is based on difference by sector.
In regards to whether this relationship between the party state and the firm persists when firms go abroad to regions like Latin America.
That is exactly what I want to figure out. I'm still researching this topic. I still think the answer lies in the sector. So in some sectors, I would say the Chinese state has interest and strategic reasons to keep a very close relationship with their companies, even when these companies are abroad. But when these companies go abroad, depending on how big their asset is in China, carrots are usually more useful to keep them in line than sticks. Because when these companies go overseas, right, then they're subject to domestic regulatory environment, no longer Chinese regulatory environment. So unless this company is a huge base and asset in China where you can threaten them with the base camp, otherwise carrots will be more important. But this is for very specific strategic sectors. For a lot of other sectors, Chinese companies, particularly private sector, is at this point on an exodus almost. the economy in China is slowing down, their environment is not ideal. A lot of them really just want to go explore new markets. And if their sectors are not that strategic to the Chinese government, the state relationship is very thin when these companies go abroad. So sector is, I think, the key marker for this kind of relationship.
In your research, did you find some cases where firms tried to perform compliance while minimizing the real costs? If so, how did the state respond?
They do, a lot of the times. So it really depends on the project. So sometimes when the project is in, similar to a bribe, like, so for example, Li Chuncheng in Chengdu famously, right, built one of the largest shopping center when the center was built, Wanqiu Zhongxin, 2006. He asked his business allies to build it because he can't use government money. And the business ally, knowing that this project is not going to bring money, said, can we please reduce the scope, right? Can you introduce another business coming in that share the cost? And then they would negotiate. So business try to push back, but sometimes they don't get to. If it's like a regulation for an entire sector, then business will try to push back without much effect. So it's really sectoral phenomenon, I think.
Thanks for everybody again, and happy holiday and enjoy it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your input.